Hi everyone, my name is Parissa Ayubi, and my partner, Carson Edgerton, and I put together this design thinking video to kind of sum all of the research that we've been doing for the past 10 weeks for our Bio 180, aka Marine Biology course. And so today we will be talking about isolated ecosystems, specifically whale falls, and their importance for maintaining deep sea biodiversity. So before we get into the actual video, I just want to run through a couple of these cool little pictures here at the intro. So right here on the left, you can see that is a whale fall. We will kind of get into that definition a little bit later. This picture is very interesting because it's actually a whale carcass at the surface of the water prior to actually sinking and becoming a whale fall ecosystem. But if you zoom in really quick, you can see that that's actually a saltwater crocodile on the left, and that is a shark on the right. So these kind of, ecosystems that these whale carcasses provide will bring animals and predators from far and wide. And I think this is a really great example of that. And then this, everybody's probably seen something like this before where, a whale carcass will wash up and then the scientists have to kind of depressurize the stomach contents before it explodes pretty spectacularly. So we are going to be moving into kind of laying the foundation of marine ecosystems and from there move into whale falls specifically. So in order to truly understand the importance of whale falls, we have to first understand what makes up an ecosystem. An ecosystem, in the most general sense, is a biological community of interacting organisms and their environment. We interact with ecosystems every day on land, so it's a bit easier to understand the relationships between species and how they are all interconnected, especially as biology students. When it comes to marine ecosystems, though, it becomes more difficult for people without scientific backgrounds to highlight the connecting factors between organisms. The easiest way to understand these ecosystems is to compare them to ones we see in everyday life. And that is that all organisms rely upon one another for survival and help maintain a special balance. All organisms serve a purpose to one another, both in life and death. And whale falls are no different. Whales are essential for the survival of other marine organisms, both in life and death. Whale falls actually occur when a whale passes away and then sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Whales are rich in organic material and can provide the necessary nutrients, especially for organisms that are found in the deep sea. Deep sea ecosystems are much different from those that are easily observed from the surface. This is because of the harsher living conditions and relative resource abundance of the deep sea. Whale falls can occur in the bathyal and abyssal zones of the ocean, as well as beyond. These are areas where there is little to no sunlight available for the organisms. All marine ecosystems that develop in these areas do not have the ability to rely upon foundational species like phytoplankton and other primary producers because it's impossible to conduct photosynthesis in these conditions. Therefore, the organisms that live in these zones must rely upon their own predation skills or be lucky enough to attach themselves to areas that have high nutrition concentrations. Whale falls are such a place with high nutrient concentration. On the seafloor, these carcasses can create complex localized ecosystems that supply sustenance to deep sea organisms for decades. And so before we move on, just want to break down. So these are a couple of the different organisms that will feed on whale falls in different stages, almost kind of like shifts. This is the squat lobster, Osidax, which we will talk about a little bit later, hagfish, and this is just kind of on the bottom left. It's a picture of the smorgasbord that is often whale falls. So whale falls will provide nutrients for other organisms throughout several stages: mobile scavenger, enrichment opportunistic, sulfophilic, and reef stages. The mobile scavenger stage feeds the mobile vertebrates that strip the tissue of the whale and prepare the next stage. The enrichment opportunistic stage describes when bacteria and invertebrates begin to colonize the skeleton of the whale that has recently settled on the ocean floor. The sulfophilic stage is when chemoautotrophic endosymbiosis is introduced and the organisms attached to the whale carcass begin to excrete sulfide as the lipids of the whale bones are decomposed. The final reef stage occurs when suspension feeders orient themselves on the protruding bones of the skeleton to exploit flow enhancement. So as you can see here, clearly in the bottom kind of middle, bottom right picture, you can see that there's a ton of organisms living on the whale fall, within the whale fall. And so the organisms that are living inside the whale fall are called exhibiting endosymbiosis. These are the same organisms that we talked about during the enrichment, opportunistic, and sulfonic stages of the whale fall. Endosymbiotes are organisms that live inside of other organisms. A prime example of an endosymbiotic species are the Osedax bone worms that are found primarily in whale falls. These worms have evolved to prey upon the bones of deceased animals. They will bore holes in the bones of whales to gain access to the enclosed lipids that are trapped inside. The Osedax bone worms are a prime example of organisms that have evolved to optimize their effective feeding habits in whale falls. This is because they are only found in the deep sea and can only survive in whale falls. Considering that whale falls can persist and provide nutrients for organisms between 40 to 80 years, which even though before I said for decades, this is an exact number of how long these nutrients have been found to continue benefiting the deep sea environment. These worms can survive on the whale's nutrients for a very long time. But one question is, how are these worms able to migrate to new whale falls to make sure that their species does not go extinct? Whale falls are not overly abundant, and they are not found in one set region. This is because of the mobile nature of whales with their migratory habits. This can lead to whale falls being discovered in both deep sea and shallow water ecosystems. Here we have a clip from the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. Here we are able to see the actual interaction between other species at the whale fall. As you can see, there are many organisms, like octopi and fish, that have attached themselves to the bones of the whale in order to gather nutrients from the lipids inside. At this point, we can also see a brown fuzzy organism on the ends of the whale bones, particularly the rib bones highlighted right here. These are organisms that are taking advantage of the whale's high lipid concentration. The whale found is approximately 4 to 5 meters long and is supporting a plethora of life. In this video, however, there are no Osedax bone worms to be seen, and whether that says something about their own conservation, their own vulnerability as a species, we're not quite sure, because a lot of these underwater deep sea species have been very, very difficult to, gather quantitative data on. So as you can see, the whale communities in the deep sea can be extremely diverse. However, this is not necessarily the case for whale falls that are found in shallow water. At first glance, it may be perplexing, but understanding the abundance of nutrients in the shallow water in comparison to the deep sea is critical. The shallow water communities have other areas to obtain the nutrients that they need, and that results in less biodiversity at whale fall sites. In the deep sea, the whale falls are the only source of nutrients for many of these organisms. Although this dependence that some organisms have on whale fall nutrients is important, it can ultimately have a negative effect on the organisms if whale fall sites were to change. And unfortunately, we have seen this phenomena occur, and different deep sea communities and ecosystems be disturbed by the sudden decrease in whale falls. We actually were fortunate enough to be able to talk to Dr. Craig R. Smith, a current professor of oceanography at the University of Hawaii. He has spent his entire academic career researching biodiversity, disturbance ecology, human impacts on seafloor ecosystems, and of course, whale falls. When we asked him what the impact of any shifts in whale fall frequency would be and what that would mean for the environment as a whole, especially these deep sea ecosystems, this is what he had to say.
Yeah, there are. I guess it depends on what you mean by environmental, but one of the things that we've been studying over the years, and I don't know if you've seen all the papers we have. We have a couple of recent papers about whales as ecosystem engineers, and also the effects of whaling on deep sea whalefall communities. And I consider whaling to be an environmental impact because it's human exploitation of natural populations. And there's quite a bit of evidence and based on modeling and in particular of changes in the abundance of whale falls and what we know about conservation biology, that what effect of humans on the environment in terms of exploitation of whales and whaling is that it's probably affecting the diversity of animals that whalefall specialists, that whalefalls that live on whalefalls in the deep sea, specialized communities of animals. And we now think that there may be, we've documented at least 100 species that are very abundant on whalefalls and haven't been found anywhere else. So there's a good chance these are whalefall specialists. And what happens from whaling, obviously, is that the abundance of living whales, and thus the abundance of whales that are dying and sinking to the seafloor, and the abundance of whale falls is driven way down. If you remove 90% of the whales over time, you're going to have a lot fewer whales dying and sinking to the bottom of the ocean. And so we've done some modeling studies showing actually that this is probably applying quite a high extinction pressure on whalefall specialists in the deep sea, and that the largest species of whales and the largest individuals within these within whale populations are disproportionately important because, again, of these nonlinear relationships between the size of a whale and the size of the whalefall habitat that it creates. So very big whales, apparently, they last a long time as whalefall habitats. They appear to be very important potentially very important in providing, allowing whalefall specialists to evolve and persist in deep sea ecosystems. There are also important issues, things like environmental degradation. It turns out most of the baleen whales feed in one location, typically at high latitudes, and then they migrate to lower latitudes for breeding. Gray whales and humpback whales are famous for this, but blue whales also appear to do this, and a variety of other baleen whales. And so environmental degradation in both their feeding grounds and in their breeding grounds also has impacts, including whale watching. That appears to be can be a major source of stress in places like Hawaii with humpback whales and in the Puget Sound area. It is clearly a big stress for orcas, killer whales in the Puget Sound area. And another source of environmental degradation that probably is impacting whales and ultimately whale falls is the noise environment. Probably all whales, as far as I know, use sound in their communication, some of them use them in their hunting, for example, the delphinids, orcas, and dolphins, etc. And a lot of the baleen whales use sounds for social communication, and they may also use it for navigation. And the noise environment of the ocean has really been altered dramatically, especially by ships.
Interviewing Dr. Smith made us come to the realization that the dispersal of whale falls is something that's been greatly affected since the introduction of commercial whaling in the early 20th century. By removing whales from the ecosystem and then dumping all of the carcasses in similar areas, it eliminates the variability that whale fall positioning usually has. And the reality is that because scientists only really made it down to the deep sea in the 70s, but commercial whaling has been going on since the early 20th century, we don't have any metric or, equilibrium point to measure the change in whale falls and their abundance and different things like that, because our entire data collection from the deep sea has been, compromised by this commercial whaling process that's been going on. And so with with dumping all of the carcasses in similar areas and eliminating the variability that whalefall positionality usually has, this naturally affects the breeding habits of organisms like Osedax boneworms and other invertebrates. Usually these organisms rely upon releasing their larvae into the water column in hopes that they will be able to find a new whalefall. But if the natural population of whales are being greatly affected, there is going to be a massive decrease in the number of whalefalls that are usually found along the course of the water column. This will limit the survival of these invertebrate organisms, like Dr. Smith mentioned. And these organisms that rely on the presence of whalefalls, this will limit the survival of these invertebrate organisms, like Dr. Smith mentioned, that rely on the presence of whalefalls to continue their species. Which is why it's so important for us to think about the potential effects that we have on all of the ecosystems around us. Bringing it back to the first thing that we talked about in this video, we mentioned before that we are always surrounded by ecosystems, but what we at times do not realize is that humans have the potential to affect ecosystems that we don't even see. This is true for the deep sea ecosystem as well, and different communities in the marine world that have been surviving for millennia. For whale falls, it is through human interference that both the whale populations and the deep sea communities that rely on whales begin to lack diversity. We as individuals must think of ways to counteract the negative effects that this has, because there are so many butterfly effects that are likely to occur as a result of whale diversity, whale abundance, and all of these other factors being depleted. So this is a serious moment for us to all consider the impact that we have on not just the surface waters in our planet, but also the deep sea ones. Thank you.